What's the most common areas that lawyers find themselves getting into trouble? I'm assuming that most ethics issues are attorneys who had no intention of violating any ethics, right? So that means that there's an opportunity for us to share with our listeners some things that they should be aware of or be careful about or take measures to protect themselves against. So I'm curious, what are some of the leading issues that you've seen come up where it took an attorney by surprise and we can really learn from that?
Well, it's actually an easier question than people think, because the single area where lawyers across the country find themselves getting into trouble is they mismanage their trust accounts. Mm-hmm. And typically they're called IOLTA, interest on lawyers' trust accounts. And it's not lawyers who steal. That's a different world completely, but it's lawyers who mismanage. And as a result of that, we have seen without question statistically and anecdotally that lawyers get into trouble that way. There may be an inquiry about something and then their accounts get audited and it turns out they haven't cared for funds or haven't reconciled the accounts or didn't, have money in there for decades. And then they suddenly find themselves in ethical trouble. I've been, because of a variety of roles in various bar associations, been really trying to what I'll call reform that area. But IOLTA accounts are mismanagement are the number one area sort of generally. And then you find that a lot of it is, the next part is conflicts of interest and sort of mismanaging that aspect of clients. The single number one source of client complaints across the country to disciplinary authorities is actually what you might not be surprised at: failure to communicate, not responding. That's what usually gets the inquiries there, and then they find other things.
Very interesting that you highlight that. This is the second conversation I'm having today. It's really interesting because I batched the podcast guest interviews for our listeners' sake. So Daniel and I are having a conversation at almost 4:00 in the afternoon. So I've had 5 conversations today before this one. And what's interesting is that one conversation was entirely on cybersecurity, which is something that you mentioned is an area of your expertise. And then there's another conversation where we highlighted, this past point that you just made. So, and that is the failure to communicate. My previous guest right before you, and he said that the number one reason for somebody seeking a new attorney is because the attorney they were with failed to communicate, failed to respond, failed to keep them up to date on what was going on. So it's interesting that you can probably avoid a lot of ethical issues, not because of the issues themselves, but by just not having anybody look at you, by doing the right thing and being there for your clients and communicating with them, which is a very interesting concept that you should actually communicate with your clients.
Well, it's true. And I hear lots of attorneys say, and sometimes it is true, life would be easier if you didn't have to communicate with them. But I find that, communication and having them understand things is important for a lot of lawyers. It's the management of that communication that becomes the problem. They feel like they have to respond either instantly or they just ignore it. And time management is often the problem. My latest book is called How to Do More in Less Time, and it's about time management. But that's why they get into those roles. Either they just don't want to be bothered or they don't know how to handle it.
I love this concept of time management. I don't know, did I know about this book? Let's talk about this for a moment. How to Do More in Less Time. Is that the name of the book?
Yeah, it's the second edition just came out, 2 months ago.
Okay, so let's talk about this specific issue because this is important for our listeners, right? A lot of them might be failing right now in their client communication. So you either feel like you need to respond right away, which is going to completely wreck your schedule, or you ignore it and don't respond at all. So what is this from a time management perspective? How do you solve this problem? What ideas can you toss out there for somebody to try to implement?
Well, there's a couple that are really important. One is sort of knowing when you're going to do certain things in your day. I get volumes of email. There are times of the day when I will focus on them or not focus on them. Today we're talking and it's a Tuesday. I had actually been out of town at bar association meetings and came back to the office on Monday. I knew I had a particular deadline of an appellate brief that had to be done. So I didn't deal with my email yesterday. I dealt with part of it in the afternoon and the rest I'm finishing today. And I explained to people, and most people understand. I looked at it enough to know that if there was something important, that I would deal with it. The other part of it, though, is managing expectation. I explain to clients that, I will respond to them promptly. It doesn't always mean instantly, because if I'm focused on client Smith's, whatever it is, matter, I'm going to give that client complete focus. And then when I respond to them, they're going to get that same complete focus rather than me trying to do two things at once. Managing expectations is an enormous part of managing the time. You can't stop the email. I do not text with clients, and I'm tech savvy, and I've written books on technology, but I don't text with clients. I limit it and they understand it. We are able to communicate, and I've never had an issue with a client that way. But managing time is managing the expectations of others and planning. So when I come into the office every day, one of the tips in the book, and my co-author is a woman named Allison Joes and I, and this is one of her points, is every day you make a list of 3 items that you must do that day that you're going to do. But at the same point, there's certain things you're not going to do. And yesterday, my not do list was email. Today, it's going to be the other. And then tomorrow, I know that I've already told my office, I'm going to finish this other brief that's due. And that's going to be my day tomorrow, all morning. And then whatever parts of the brief have to be done after that will fall into place. But you manage the time, and you don't let the time manage you.